So today's video is going to be about the UFO sightings that I have witnessed in the state of Oregon and my most recent sighting, which happened yesterday at about 12:37 p.m. Pacific time at a golf course in Gold Hill. So I'm going to share a little bit about my previous sightings, and then I'm going to get into the details of yesterday's sighting as well as the dreams that I experienced last night after my sighting yesterday. So my first Oregon UFO sighting was in broad daylight on January 22nd, I believe the year 2014. It is one of my best friend's birthday, and we were in Ashland, Oregon ice skating for her birthday. Everyone decided that it was time to go get food and get a few drinks, so they took off down the street past the ice skating rink, and I, of course, forgot my wallet. So I had to walk back to the car by myself. And upon walking past Lithia Park after getting my wallet, so Lithia Park would be on my right and the ice skating rink would have been on my left, I looked up on the horizon where in that direction there is an open valley right there, and the trees were all on my right side. There was nothing at that point in time between the buildings blocking my view, and none of the buildings in Ashland, none of the tall buildings in Ashland are in that direction. They're all off up the road, off Main Street, up to the right. And I saw what looked to be a very similar shape to a snowmobile in the sky, hovering very low in the open valley and fairly big. The metal on it was so crisp and clean that the sun shining off of it was making it reflect so intensely that there was only a small portion of it that I could tell was a new, like a normal aluminum type of color of metal, and the rest was just a bright light. But it had this type of hump shape that trailed off and created what looks similar to the shape of a snowmobile. What I found fascinating about this is I'm staring at it very intensely, looking around for anybody else to notice what I was noticing, because it wasn't the shape of a helicopter, it wasn't the shape of an airplane, it was so low and so close to the tree line in that open valley that you would have been able to hear if there was any noise. There was absolutely no noise, and it kind of just very smoothly just floated right on by. And so I didn't want to break eye contact with it. I kept looking and debunking and trying to contemplate what it was that I was experiencing in that moment, even though, of course, everything was screaming at me, you know what's happening. And they also have a lot of paragliders in this area, especially in the Applegate Valley, so I have experienced a low-flying motorized paraglider coming over top of my house. So I know the shape of those as well as how loud they can be. And I believe there was a man on the left side of the street walking in the opposite direction, and everybody else in the park was very preoccupied, and nobody within my frontal view or peripheral vision and directly behind me that I was trying to make eye contact with to see if anyone else was experiencing what I was experiencing. Nobody took notice. And so I start walking a little bit faster past the park because I know that it was coming up on a point where it was going to start passing the tree line of the park in front of me. And so I sped up my step, and I could see it through the first 3 to 4 trees still trailing through the open valley on that horizon in the air. And upon speeding up faster, knowing I was going to lose it as the trees got thicker, I get to the end of the road where you can clearly see the open valley past the buildings that are there. Based on the lower buildings, it was, hovering right above those. and was just completely gone. At that point, the park closest to me, where the trees began to block it, they weren't out in the area where it was specifically, so there was no tall buildings, no trees, no nothing to block a visual view, so it just completely vanished, in other words. The flight pattern was not erratic, not zigzagging. In this case, it was completely normal. There was no noise, and it was a very odd-shaped object and was shining very brightly. The sun was directly behind me, shining on it, and so it created a perfect glare, like a sun reflection off of it, as well as still being able to see that it was a metal object. And that was, out of all of the UFO sightings I've experienced, the closest, most vivid one for being in broad daylight. And so I was super hyped up after that. I got to the location where everybody else was and finally got my wallet, and of course it's my friend's birthday, and I'm trying to be super excited and not take any attention away from her, but I just had to tell everybody what I had just experienced. And so it was a pretty magnificent day in my book, I think. My second sighting happened in 2017 in December, and I was driving home from work, and I was in Gold Hill, Oregon, close to the Gold Hill, Oregon vortex. And this UFO was a solid ball of light, like a mini sun, in the sky with what perceives as no direct flight pattern, no straight line, hovering motion like the one in Ashland. And it was zigzagging. It was a little bit all over the horizon and in between the mountains, and I did the same thing, waiting for it to potentially turn, show some type of shape, make noise, roll down my window. Driving, of course, at this point, so I'm looking at other people in cars as they were going by, trying to see if anybody else was staring at what I was staring at, and didn't notice any unusual faces in the other people driving by, and didn't make eye contact with anybody. But the next day after that, I was trolling social media, and there was a YouTube post or some type of news post that came out that a UFO had been spotted over one of the major volcanoes at the Yellowstone Park in Wyoming. And upon watching that video, not entirely 100% sure if it was fake news or not, even though I believe it was on a Fox News 61 channel on a website. The ball of light that was caught on the camera at Yellowstone was the same exact ball of light that I had seen around the Gold Hill, Oregon vortex that day. And they happened, I believe, on the same exact day. I had seen it and had just seen the news posting the following day. And that one also equally just trailed off to the left from the mountains on the right side of me, the horizon. It kind of did a zigzag motion where it got closer and got brighter, then got farther away, and then was gone. And so I'm driving home, and I've got the buzz, and it was this particular experience. There was a precognitive feeling. There was an intuitive feeling leaving work that day that there was a vibrational shift that happened. It felt different. It felt like there was this part of me that was anticipating it, that knew I was going to see something. And so when it did appear, there was a shock factor, but I remember having that thought at the same exact time of this knowing that it was going to happen. And so that was intriguing to me, that even though it had been about 3 years that had passed since seeing the one in Ashland, that there was some type of anticipated feeling that came with it. So yesterday, my friend took me on a spontaneous adventure to the golf course, to the driving range, and I haven't been golfing since I was a small child, so I was kind of excited. I love doing spontaneous things, and I was not expecting that at all. And it worked out all around because I had my third Oregon broad daylight UFO sighting. And I remember after it happening, picking up my phone specifically to look at the time, and the time was 12:37. I do not know how long it lasted. It was not more than a minute. So 12:36, 12:37 p.m. Pacific time is when it happened. And we were in two separate sections of the driving range, and I'm standing there not getting ready to hit a ball. I'm completely zoned out. My friend Alex is behind me. He was staring at his ball, getting ready to make his hit, and there was a man with his two sons down at the very other end, and he had just hit a ball up into the sky. So naturally, I'm watching to see how far his ball is going, and you can see that the ball is in contrast with the color of the sky, the blue horizon. There were absolutely no clouds around, and I'm watching as this ball drops. But as I see the ball go up and start to drop, I notice just in my perspective from there, which would have been anywhere from a few inches to a few feet over. I mean, looking in the sky that's so far away, there's no way to really perceive what the distance was, that there was another inanimate object. And so what was interesting about this object, it had the traditional saucer shape, and the sun was in that same direction shining on it, so it looked like a ball of light shining off of the metal on one side. But as it turned, its flight pattern, it stayed consistent in the sky. It didn't get closer or farther away, but it turned on its access points a couple different times where the bottom became shaded, which allowed me to see that it was the perfect saucer shape. And so for me, what seemed like a lifetime, and I'm staring at it long enough before I finally go, "Do you see that?" And I try to get my friend's attention to look, and he missed the majority of it because he was staring at his ball, getting ready to make his hit, and then caught the glimpse of it before it completely disappeared. In this case, it was, turning on an access point. It was showing me that it was shining on the light this direction and was shaded underneath, and then vice versa, and the shading of it would change. And then it faded backwards until it literally disappeared into a tiny pinpoint of just a dot and was completely gone. And so there were no trees, there was no mountains, there was no clouds, there was nothing for it to disappear in front of. It was like a tiny speck in the matrix in my eye and was just gone. So once again, was on the buzz. So my 3 UFO sightings in Oregon have been a few years apart within each other. All of them have been in broad daylight. And a few others that I've had that were at night were in other states. And it was completely dark out. So it's intriguing to me that the 3 that I have seen have been in broad daylight. And one was up close, much more vivid. The other one was just a solid ball of light, like a mini sun floating through the sky. What's interesting about the third one is it's been almost exactly 2 years, around the same period of time, only a few months apart, that I saw the one around the Gold Hill, Oregon vortex, and this was also in that same valley, in that same area, right off of the highway pointed in the same direction that I would have been looking at it driving home in 2017. So I was feeling grateful. I was saying, "Thank you, Star Family," and all the things. But what's even more intriguing is there was, with this sighting, an anticipation, except not moments before it happened. There was no anticipation. I was completely distracted and laughing and having fun, doing a really bad job at hitting golf balls. And so the anticipation for me has been the last few days this week of having that knowing, like you're being watched, but not in a negative way, that there's these observations being made upon you, that making some type of psychic connection with the fact that I felt the extraterrestrial essence of my own being and entities that I channel and guides that I have kind of coming through, and the intense dreams that I was having. So last night and early this morning, the dreams that I had were otherworldly. I started to fall asleep, so I was in trance and began to start astral projecting into what was a different world entirely, where most of the buildings were all metal. And there were a lot of different sizes and shapes of UFOs floating around. And it was like I was looking into a ball, like a snow globe, of this otherworldly experience happening, and the UFOs zooming by me. But everything was gray in tone and color, and faded purples. Nothing had any other distinct color and was very shaded. As I fell asleep, went off to REM, started to dream and transition in and out of waking up, what I remembered the most of is being on an entirely different planet experience, but very much like Earth, but different shaped buildings, very odd, like round types of structures on the top that you see in some water towers. And there was some type of virus or something that had happened, and I remember being with a group of people and being very much aware that they had all died. And then at some point the dream shifted, and I was in a spaceship in space where there was over, specifically the number that came to me, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in this spaceship. And I remember looking from a high point inside the spaceship down like you're at a huge mall, and there are just hundreds, thousands of people everywhere walking around like you are in some crazy, enormous big city, like a Disney World or something, where people are really in close quarters, just packing in, trying to get to the next event. And in motion, things were very busy. And then something happened where the dream transitioned again, where I remember having a conversation with, in this life, one of my ex-boyfriends, in the dream, just a normal friend, where we were communicating through some type of what felt like telepathic energy, but it was like we were writing letters, and the letters would get sent and disappear, but the information would come back into the mind. And it was me saying it's really hard to connect right now because I'm on a spaceship in space. And then the dream transitioned to where I was back down in the reality where the virus had happened, and I was on Earth again. And it was like I was trying to visit this person on Earth, and they were still there after the traumatic experience of this major virus had hit. And it was in my perception, based on the life that I had been living on the spaceship, that everybody below was dead. And I went back to the same location in this house with this weird water tower ball-shaped home, where the doors, instead of going up like this, were this way. And I had crawled in, and I remember that I was trying to avoid someone. At this point, I was almost being chased. Like, there are these types of rebellious people in this timeline, in this world, like vagabonds, so to speak, people out there that are trying to collect objects, get things from people, like survival mode. And so I get back in this location where I had been before, where friends of mine had died, and I'm trying to hide from these people. And then the more I'm exploring inside this area, where it was almost, I went into a building that was like a house, but it was almost a mini piece of land, like a farm with separate buildings, and became its own mini world and experience inside of another globe-shaped type of thing. And the people were alive. They were in hiding. And they had originally been dead, and I remember seeing the old mattresses where people had died from this sickness, where there was even still a very vivid yellow bile stained into the mattresses from the sickness that had occurred. And I met up with someone, and I remember them being at a desk, and it was one of the people that had passed away. And they were taking these pills. This is what fascinated me the most. They were taking what looked like, they're on triangle and rectangular shaped pieces of paper, and like glued to the top of them were these yellow-orange pills that looked like computer chips, some type of microchip. And they were months apart in setting. They were on a regimen, and these pills had brought them back to life and was sustaining their current physical bodies even after death, to where their consciousness and their soul could continue to live in the physical body. And they were working on being able to create something that kept it going long term, that the pills were the only thing keeping them alive, these little microchips, and that there was this secret science behind all of it. So it became clear upon waking up and remembering all of this that the people in the spaceship are living a completely different reality than what the people on Earth are still living, and are not aware that their loved ones and their family and the friends and the people that they thought have died are down there surviving off of this high technology pill. And I remember watching this person specifically take up the pad of paper with the microchip on it, and you just lick it right off, and then showing me the regimen of a series of months of the different pills that they have to take, and then it ends. And then there was no clarity on what happens next, or anything behind the science of what they were working on to continue to prolong the physical life, or even details to how they got brought back to life, other than communicating that the pills were the only thing keeping them alive. So outside of any subconscious or unconscious debunking and deciphering of this particular dream, and the symbolism it might mean for me specifically, it was fascinating nonetheless. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening. I hope